Good afternoon, everyone. Recorded by Richter here. We're back with a brand new segment. Now, I am continuing along with Detroit stuff, but this is going to be a little bit different than what you're used to out of this channel. As of now, I think I've only done content on music. I've mentioned books and movies in my reviews and artist highlights, but I actually haven't done any segments specifically on movies yet or specifically on books. And so that is what I'm here to do today. It is following in my Detroit month stuff though, which I've decided to continue on for the entirety of this channel. And today I am going to be reviewing a book by an author named Jeffire, and the book is called Motown Burning. Now, before I get into the actual book, I'll tell you how I came to find out about it. So shortly after I graduated high school, 20 years ago now, which is crazy to say out loud, I took classes at a local community college around the area that I live in called Schoolcraft College. And in my English class, I forget what exact English class it was, I was recommended a book by our teacher, and it was this book, Motown Burning. Now, Jeffire is an author from the Detroit area. He grew up around here, and it's apparent if you read the book. And I'll read a little bit about the author here and this really quick. Jeffire is in his 60s. He's from the Detroit area. His influences include people like Raymond Carver, August Wilson, and Philip Levine. 2005, Motown Burning was named Grand Prize winner in the Mount Aerosmith Novel Competition. And in 2007, it won a gold medal for regional fiction in the Independent Publishing Awards. And a former chair of the Pulitzer, Philip F. O'Connor, said, "It works. I don't often say that, but it has a drive and integrity that gives it credible life. I find a novel with heart." In 2009, Andrea Milica included Motown Burning in her list of 6 savory novels set in Detroit, along with works. But anyhow, that's just a little bit about John there. So I think it's interesting to also note here that that book was recommended to me almost 20 years ago, and I had borrowed her copy, but I didn't finish it before I had to give it back to her. And so I had read the beginning part of it and then kind of just went on with life and forgot about it. I don't know what sparked the memory, but it popped in my head recently, this Motown Burning book, and I decided to see if I could find it. So I found it online, ordered some copies, and I am now finally able to say that I finished Motown Burning. And man, I really love it. As a Detroiter as well, it hits me in the feels, because it has all the stuff that I love about Detroit. It talks about tigers. It talks about our music. Each chapter, there's like a little quote at each one by different musical artists. Some by Temptations or Stevie Wonder or MC5. This is a cool MC5 Grandy Ballroom poster. It talks about the Grandy Ballroom in this book a lot, because it was a spot where young kids could go and rock out, because a lot of the rock bands of the time in the 60s would play there. I was kind of trying to figure out what type of book is this. Is this a book about the Vietnam War? Is it a book about the Detroit riots? Is it a love story? And it's all of those things, but I think most importantly, it's a love story. It's just a love story that's centered around historical things that actually happened. The Vietnam War being one of them, and the Detroit riots. Although I've kind of changed my tune about how I've been labeling the Detroit riots. The more and more I learn about the Detroit riots, the more I want to start calling it the Detroit Uprising. Because riots insinuates that it was something that was just people that were trying to rob and loot, and that's not at all, and it couldn't be further from the truth. So before I get into this, I did want to read a little bit here that I have down about the Detroit riots, or like I just said, the uprising. So in 1967, a series of violent confrontations between residents of predominantly African American neighborhoods of Detroit and the city's police department began on July 23rd, 1967, and lasted 5 days. The uprising resulted in deaths of 43 people, including 33 black people and 10 white people. Many others were injured. More than 7,000 people were arrested, and more than 1,000 buildings were burned in the uprising. And it's considered one of the catalysts of the militant Black Power movement. Now, the immediate cause of the riot was a police raid on an illegal after-hours drinking club, which was called a Blind Pig. And basically, because I don't feel like just reading all this off, everything I've learned over the years, what it was the Black community finally putting their foot down and not being able to take the terrible harassment and horrible treatment by the Detroit Police Department. This is something that's echoed online here in the book that John wrote. It's also, I read Wayne Kramer from MC5's memoir called The Hard Stuff, and he echoed this exact same sentiment, that there was this group of white police officers that were well known in the city that were regularly harassing Black business owners and regular folks in the streets constantly. And this night that these kicked off, there was a peaceful gathering happening at one of these establishments, a party for 2 returning Vietnam War veterans, and these group of police officers started harassing them, arrested everyone at this spot, and as things unfolded, chaos kind of ensued, which led to National Guard being called in and all this craziness. But it's been unfairly labeled over the years, and I think that people don't do justice on what caused these things, and I wanted to make sure that I told that before I get into the book. Anyways, so that's the Detroit Uprising. So this book centers around 2 teenagers that are falling in love with each other. One's name's Katie, who comes from the suburbs, and the other one is Aram, who is a Armenian kid from the streets of Detroit. Katie's character comes from a well-to-do, hoity-toity, pretty racist household, and Aram comes from a broken home with not much of a family life besides his uncle Manny, who helps raise him. And this story takes you through their entire journey of meeting and Aram's character going to Vietnam and what life was like before, during, and after. And one thing that I really appreciate about the way that John wrote this book, and that's each chapter being from the perspective of a different character in the story. Each one of them, I think there's 24 chapters total. And so I think that it's really well done that way, because John writes great characters. And that is one of my biggest selling points about film, about books. Stephen King is one of my favorite authors of all time, and he's obviously labeled a horror author. But I think something that gets overlooked about Stephen King is how well he writes characters and develops them. He really gets you to care about these people. And I think John does such a good job with that too. And another thing that I really appreciated about John is John does a great job of writing from different perspectives. He gets into the mind of Katie and her parents that come from more racist upbringing, where they were not around many Black folks or different people of different nationalities and ethnicities. And so that is very much part of how they parent. And Katie, coming from a younger generation, is more open-minded and more liberal speaking. And so I think it does a good job of writing their perspectives and what shaped them. And it also does a great job writing the characters from Detroit and how they see the world. And then it takes you to Vietnam, and you get characters from different staff sergeants. Another character, Saint, who's the best friend of Aram. And each character is just written with such care that you really get like gripped into everything that he says in here. And one of the things that is a little shocking is the way that they write the war scenes. That's the one thing I will warn you about if you're going to check out this book or buy this book. It gets graphic in some of the way that it details the carnage of war. And at first I didn't know how I wanted to feel about that, because there's a specific chapter that really details some nasty stuff. And I was like, did I need that in the book? And then I got to thinking about it, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized that John was really trying to hammer home just how terrible war is and how it just kills humanity and what it does to these young people and their outlook on life going forward after they return home. And it does a great job of writing from even the perspective of the Vietnamese people that had nothing to do with the war, some soldiers, some just regular folks that were just as confused by what was happening over in Vietnam as some of the soldiers going over there. And I think it does a good job painting a picture on how much harder it is for kids and folks that come from the city have it than some of the suburbs. But I think there's an awesome juxtaposition there, because it also shows you about the struggle of the suburban kids that are trying to keep up with the Joneses and live this squeaky clean image that their parents have created for them. And so I think it just does a really good job of showing all different sides of life. And so this became much more a book to me about humanity than anything else. And this really well-written story about these two characters coming into their own in a crazy time in this country, because not only did you have the Vietnam War going on, you also had the assassination of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. and John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy were also both killed in the 60s. So there was a lot of history being made, both in a negative and positive way, and I think John just did a great job of capturing all of it. He has more books than just this one. This was his first one, Motown Burning, from 2006. He also has Stone First, Brick and Bone in 2008. He made a book called River Rouge Through the Years in 2014, which I think might be next up on my list. Although I guess maybe I should go in order and get Stone First, Brick and Bone, and then Shoveling Snow in a Snowstorm in 2016, and A Temple for Tomorrows in 2021. And I wanted to, if I ever get the chance to ask him, maybe he'll see this and be able to answer me in the comments. So the Armenian last name of Aram's Uncle Manny, I'm drawing a blank to it right now, but is the same last name as the main character of River Rouge Through the Years, because I read the synopsis of River Rouge. So that name actually meant something to John, if that is like if he was writing someone's name that he actually knows into his stories, because I just noticed, because they're not the same character. He didn't write, it's not, the story I don't think is about Uncle Manny in River Rouge, so I'm curious to find out. So I'm definitely gonna have to figure that out when I get through River Rouge. But big fan. John Jeffire did a phenomenal job of this book, and I highly recommend checking it out. And that's what I have for you today. And if you didn't know the truth about Vietnam, there is tons of information out there now. And if you didn't know the truth about the Detroit uprising, there's tons of information about it now. So I highly suggest educating yourself on that, because what was taught in school coming up isn't always what we're learning to be the truth. So yeah, go check out Motown Burning. With that, I'll see you next time. Peace.